Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this official side session on leveraging public and private sector engagement to combat grant corruption, co-organized by ICC, the International Chamber of Commerce, and III, Integrity Initiatives International. I join you today in my role as first vice chair of the International Chamber of Commerce and as the organization's high-level champion on combating corruption. I would like to start by thanking III for their work and collaboration in co-organizing this event. We have a very impressive session today with renowned leaders and experts of anti-corruption and more than 1,000 registered participants. Vivian Schiavi, ICC Deputy Director for Anti-Corruption and Corporate Responsibility, will be moderating the chat function and will endeavor to get back on questions and ask on the chat for the speakers. We are organizing this event under the auspices of the UN High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development, whose theme this year is a sustainable and resilient recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. One of the Sustainable Development Goals that this year's forum is focusing on is SDG 16, for peace, justice, and strong institutions, that targets promoting rule of law and ensuring equal access to justice, reducing corruption and bribery, and developing accountable and transparent institutions. That is why our session under the UN HLPF is the right time to take stock of what has been achieved of anti-corruption at the UN General Assembly Special Session Against Corruption, or UNGAS, that took place a month ago, and to tackle the important work that remains to be done. And first, a few words about ICC. At ICC, our commitment to fighting corruption is ingrained in our DNA. In 1977, ICC was the first business organization to develop rules against extortion and bribery. Since then, ICC has taken the lead in denouncing corruption and developing tools to promote integrity and ethics in business, also in championing effective legal frameworks to eliminate corruption globally. In this context, we are deeply concerned that COVID-19 has exacerbated instances of corruption, from increases in counterfeiting and piracy to reports of stimulus funds being misused. Recognizing these risks, in July of last year, ICC issued its guidance on integrity for a resilient response and rebuild after COVID-19, which pointed to the crucial importance of maintaining integrity and transparency in procurement during times of crisis, preserving the use of due diligence to address risk of corruption and human rights impacts presented by supply chain disturbances, countering illicit practices in times of crisis, such as counterfeit medicines, addressing corruption risks related to customs, and preserving the rule of law. Quite clearly, a resilient post-pandemic economy will need to be underpinned by a renewed focus on promoting integrity and good governance. This will only be possible through enhanced public-private cooperation. That is why it was very timely that the UN General Assembly organized a special session against corruption this past June. While the entry into force of the UN Convention Against Corruption, or UNCAC, in 2005 was a landmark achievement, in the years since, there has not been enough progress in tackling global corruption through UNCAC's review mechanism. We believe that strengthening the UNCAC enforcement mechanism could play a major role in combating pervasive corruption, which is essential if we are to build a resilient and inclusive post-pandemic economy. This will also help level the playing field for millions of businesses throughout our network that should not risk commercial opportunities to those willing to pay bribes or kickbacks. That is why ICC joined forces last month with Integrity Initiatives International and close to 100 civil society organizations and vigorously called on UN member states ahead of UNGAS to commit to establishing an intergovernmental expert working group to prepare concrete proposals for new frameworks to address gaps in UNCAC. Strengthening UNCAC enforcement mechanisms would help level the playing field for businesses and governments and will help repatriate stolen assets. While the political declaration adopted by UN member states at UNGAS is not as ambitious as we would have wanted, we see that it can pave a way forward for real progress. We welcome the declaration endorsement for collective action between public and private sectors in the fight against corruption, and we also welcome the UNGAS commitment for beneficial ownership transparency, as transparency in company ownership is an essential starting point for accountability and integrity. The UNGAS political declaration closes by inviting states to identify gaps and solutions in the global anti-corruption framework. And while this may not sound striking, it is the first time there is an official recognition that more needs to be done for UNCAC implementation. And there is a plan for the UNCAC Conference of State Parties to examine this at our next December meeting in Cairo. We need to use the momentum now to catalyze these moderate advances toward more ambitious action. This means working together in a constructive way, the public and the private sector, towards joint solutions, as we cannot work in silos. This has to include concrete action, including addressing the need for integrity in the public sector and tackling both the supply side and the demand side of bribery. And we need to be open to looking for solutions outside of the box, even if it means setting up mechanisms outside of UNCAC that bolster cross-border cooperation and enforcement for anti-corruption. In closing, I encourage frank and ambitious discussions in our session today. Only by challenging the status quo and pursuing new, stronger accountability mechanisms can we really move the needle in making integrity everyone's business. Without that, there can be no prospect of delivering fully on the Sustainable Development Goals. ICC, as the institutional representative of 45 million businesses, stands firmly committed to continue to work with all stakeholders to deliver on this shared goal. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria Fernandez. What a wonderful message and a wonderful way for us to kick off this joint conversation sponsored by ICC and III. I'm Elaine Dzenski. I'm the Vice Chair of Integrity Initiatives International, or III, as we sometimes call ourselves. This is actually the second virtual conversation that we've organized together with the ICC to bring together a wide constituency of interests around the anti-corruption agenda, and more specifically around the enforcement of laws and regulations to hold officials, corrupt officials, accountable for their actions. III is a leading advocate in the campaign to establish an international anti-corruption tribunal, which would be used in the event that a country is unwilling or unable to prosecute perpetrators of grand corruption. We were formed in 2016, and our board is comprised of more than 20 individuals from 8 countries and a variety of backgrounds: public sector, private sector, civil society, academia. Through these diverse backgrounds, we have generated alignment around the need to strengthen laws and regulations, and as I said, to hold corrupt officials accountable for their actions. Why is this so important? It's important because if we really want to shift the needle and bring about a level, transparent playing field, particularly for business, we need to ensure that our laws are actually enforced. And this has been a challenge for a number of years. And of course, there's been much good work done through the UN Convention Against Corruption, the OECD, and other multilateral institutions, and of course at the national level, to put new laws and standards and agreements in place. But unless they're fully enforced, we really are missing a key component of moving the anti-corruption agenda forward. So the concept of an international anti-corruption tribunal has generated a lot of momentum. Just last month, over 100 leaders from 45 countries signed a declaration in support of its creation. Now, our conversation today is broader. Our focus is about understanding where anti-corruption efforts are going. Maria Fernanda mentioned the UN Special Assembly Against Corruption. We will talk about those outcomes and where the next steps might be in terms of moving forward on a multilateral agenda and how we can be helpful in that process. But we also want to talk about innovation, how the private sector can bring, for example, digital innovation into governance to help build more solid institutions, bring a more solid framework of governance, which is good for citizens, it's good for business, it's good for foreign direct investment. We need rule of law. That is absolutely critical. And we know that businesses in particular operate with more certainty when we have a stable set of rules that help govern how investments are made. So there are many angles to look at. We know, again, that the private sector plays an important role in strengthening a global anti-corruption framework. Our goal is to push for creative solutions and to see where we can bring more ideas, bring more traction to help shift the needle more quickly. We have tremendous momentum right now. There are so many things that are happening, whether it's the UN special session and those outcomes to national efforts. For example, in my home country of the US, we've had tremendous movement even over the last month with the introduction of an anti-corruption statement coming from the Biden administration. These are political and policy initiatives upon which we can build to bring that level playing field and to really make a shift for everyone and to do it in a permanent way. So that is really our objective. So thank you to all of our panelists and our participants today. Without you, of course, we wouldn't have this amazing conversation and this opportunity to see how we can continue to collaborate going forward. And once again, thanks to our partners at the ICC. It's been a tremendous partnership thus far, and we look forward to the next steps. So thank you very much.
Welcome to the first session of this UN high-level panel that focuses on the UN General Assembly outcomes and the options for the road ahead. My name is Vivian Schiavi. I'm Deputy Director for Integrity, Anti-Corruption, and Responsible Business Conduct at ICC. I will be moderating this session, and I'd like to start by thanking Integrity Initiatives International for their work and collaboration in co-organizing this session. As we heard in the opening remarks, ICC was a pioneer in the business fight against corruption. Fighting corruption is essential for a level playing field between the public sector and the private sector, within the private sector and public sectors, and it's essential for a level playing field for trade between nations. That is why ICC joined with Integrity Initiatives International, vigorously calling on the UN member states ahead of the UN General Assembly Special Session Against Corruption to establish an intergovernmental expert working group to prepare concrete proposals for new frameworks to address gaps in UNGAS implementation. While the declaration adopted at UNGAS did not reach that result, it did show signs of advancement, including endorsement of collective action between the public and private sectors in the fight against corruption. Today, our session will explore new approaches for increasing integrity in governments post-UNGAS, options on scaling up integrity through judicial reform, and take up in different governmental fora to move a more ambitious anti-corruption agenda globally. Without further ado now, I'd like to open the floor to our panelists. I will introduce each panelist with the first question put to them. The first question is for Gillian Dell of Transparency International. As head of the conventions program at Transparency International, Gillian focuses on issues relating to grand corruption, impunity, foreign bribery enforcement, asset recovery, and international anti-corruption conventions. Gillian has co-authored several editions of the Exporting Corruption report with regard to OECD convention enforcement, and she co-founded the UNCAC Coalition, a global civil society network dedicated to implementation of the UN Convention Against Corruption. Transparency International is in the lead for calling for innovative solutions for integrity and transparency and has been working to develop a legal definition of grand corruption. Gillian, what progress did you see coming out of the UN General Assembly Special Session Against Corruption?
Greetings from Berlin, and many thanks to the International Chamber of Commerce and to III for organizing this timely panel and for the opportunity to speak on it. Was there progress at the UNGAS against corruption? There was some modest progress in the UNGAS political declaration, a little more than we expected, knowing how the Vienna Consensus negotiations were. But UN member states were unable to seize the opportunity to address major gaps and challenges in the UN Convention Against Corruption and its implementation, notably the challenges in tackling grand corruption, as well as challenges in international asset recovery and victims' compensation. It would also have been welcome to see UN member states address transparency problems in the UNCAC review process and the current failure to include non-governmental groups as observers in meetings of UNCAC subsidiary bodies. Because of these and other omissions, there was disappointment with the UNGAS outcome document. Still, there were some advances, but the value of what they covered depends on follow-up. So the real test of the UNGAS declaration will depend on what comes next. What kinds of advances were there? Well, generally speaking, there's some useful language in the declaration that is absent from the UN Convention Against Corruption, or UNCAC. And this language is expressed in terms of commitments. So we can hold states to account for these commitments, even if the declaration is not a treaty. There is, for example, a breakthrough in the text on beneficial ownership transparency, albeit falling short of the global standard that is needed. There are new commitments on supreme audit institutions, on effective and transparent asset declarations, on the role of legislatures in budget oversight, on open procurement databases, on confiscation of proceeds of corruption, and on transparent and accountable return of assets. And there is language on the negative impact of corruption on human rights, language that is missing from the UNCAC. States also commit to fully and effectively follow up on conclusions and observations made in UNCAC reviews. And there's provision for follow-up to the declaration itself by both the Conference of States Parties and the UN General Assembly. Last but not least, for the first time, UN member states recognize the possibility of improving on the UNCAC. The UNCAC Conference of States Parties is asked to identify gaps in implementation and in the international anti-corruption framework, and to consider recommendations by states parties to address those gaps. The follow-up avenues potentially allow for further progress and for maintaining the momentum created by the UNGAS. It will be up to states and to us, civil society, the private sector, and other stakeholders to keep the process alive and moving.
Thank you, Jillian. My next question will be from Matthias Hutter of the UNCAC Coalition. Matthias Hutter is Managing Director of the UNCAC Coalition that is working to advance anti-corruption on the global level, working with the UN Office of Drugs and Control, UNODC, and member states. Matthias has more than 10 years of experience working on transparency, access to information, anti-corruption, including in Austria, Timor-Leste, Kenya, Ghana, and Ukraine. Matthias, what were the priorities for the UNCAC Coalition going into UNGAS, and how do you evaluate the UNCAC outcome?
Thank you very much for the invitation and the opportunity to speak. So civil society, including the UNCAC Coalition, we got involved early on and started engaging with states actually over a year ago in order to make sure that the recommendations and asks of civil society were heard and ideally reflected in the political declaration of the UNGAS. We had a fairly long and comprehensive list of asks and requests because we wanted to make sure that the global anti-corruption agenda truly moves forward, that there's real progress in preventing and fighting corruption. So some of the topics high up on our list were beneficial ownership transparency, that the public can see who ultimately controls companies and legal entities, and that this information is publicly accessible to the private sector, to citizens, to journalists, and to law enforcement through publicly, freely accessible registries. We wanted to see true transparency in public contracting and public procurement to make sure that the data, the documentation of public spending, public procurement is accessible online for everybody to see, because especially during COVID, we saw a lot of money being misappropriated, a lot of problems in public contracting. We wanted to see stronger access to information, a right to information for all citizens, to hold their governments accountable, to be able to access data, information, and documents from state bodies, especially when it comes to anti-corruption efforts and public resources, public funds being used, and that these rights not only exist on paper, but are effectively implemented in practice. We wanted to see an expansion of civic space, more space for journalists, for civil society who report on corruption, who uncover corruption, because the civic sector has been under a lot of pressure, and that has been exacerbated by COVID measures in many states. We also wanted to see true transparency when it comes to the disclosure of assets, income, and assets of public officials, of managers in state-owned companies, of judges, of MPs, of mayors, of ministers, of those who hold power to make decisions in the public sector, that they annually disclose their assets, their interests to the public, so that the public can hold those officials to account, and that there are independent verification mechanisms and sanctions in cases of non-compliance. We wanted to see full transparency and accountability in public financing, in the financing of political parties, political actors, political campaigns. We see problems in that regard in many countries, and the UNCAC so far has not been adequate to ensure transparency of political actors. And a couple of final points. We wanted to see progress in asset recovery and return, that more countries make the effort to confiscate, to freeze assets, and to return those assets to the country of origin in a transparent and accountable manner, and particularly in a way that benefits the victims, the communities who have suffered from corruption, and that those funds are used to advance the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. And a big ask that was, I think, at the center of the UNGAS originally, but was not adequately addressed, was the question of impunity that Gillian already hinted to. We have grand corruption cases around the world. We have powerful leaders being involved in corruption, but they are not held to account. They enjoy impunity, and the international community needs to find answers how we can address this problem, but the UNGAS in that regard, unfortunately, did not deliver.
Thank you, Matthias. Those were a lot of asks, but I look forward to hearing in the second round if there's any room for hope. Now I'd like to pass the floor to Serena Ibrahim of the initiative Youth Against Corruption. Youth Against Corruption is a youth-led initiative that aims at contributing to preventing corruption in new ways through innovation, collective intelligence, and entrepreneurship. Serena is the executive director and founder of Youth Against Corruption. She also works as a sustainability consultant supporting smart cities and sustainability projects in the Middle East. Serena was selected by the President of the UN General Assembly to deliver a youth statement summarizing the outcome of the Youth Forum discussions during the opening of the special session of the General Assembly Against Corruption in the beginning of June this year. Serena, how do you see youth having influence on advancing the global anti-corruption agenda, including in the UNGAS processes?
Greetings from Lebanon. Thank you, Vivian and ICC team for having me. It's a pleasure to be among you. The fight against corruption is an intergenerational fight that cannot be won unless it is led globally and fought locally by people on the ground who have enough creativity, courage, and determination to stand up against corruption. And if not youth, who better hold these qualities and is up to such a challenge? Having active regional and global youth networks and agencies that mobilize youth talents, know-how, and the latest innovations and technologies in the fight against corruption can bring a lot of added value to the global anti-corruption efforts that are being done. Youth in these networks can act as regional and global integrity watchdogs and push for serious and ambitious compliance by nation states to the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. Youth have the flexibility to imagine and think of a new normal and capabilities to work on a new discourse and narrative to the global fight against corruption. And if we are to fight for a new global culture in which integrity is the norm, youth should be put at the forefront of this fight for it to succeed. However, for youth to play their role and for us to have serious efforts, we need to have serious efforts for youth to play their roles both on a national and global level. We need to make compulsory education on anti-corruption and integrity in school and universities. We need more formal and informal educational programs that enable critical thinking and sense of responsibilities and patriotism among youth. Youth as well should be recognized as equal partners in the fight against corruption. And it's not enough to inform and consult them. They have to be involved from the beginning in designing, implementing, monitoring, and evaluating national and global agendas and setting visions related to corruption or anti-corruption. Further, more efforts should be done in creating an enabling and safe environment for youth to speak up against corruption and play an active role as national and global anti-corruption watchdogs and monitors.
Thank you, Serena. All right, we'll be moving now to the second round of questions. And this is my second question for Jillian Dell of Transparency International. Jillian, following UNGAS's political declaration, what is some of the work that you see remains to be done? And what are the options that you see for addressing impunity for grand corruption?
Well, the value of the declaration, as far as it goes, depends on follow-up, and there is much work to do in that regard. First, there is no clear process for following up on the commitments that were made. That would require defining when and how to assess the adequacy of country follow-up. Some of the commitments are open to wide interpretation. So it remains for the UNCAC Conference of States Parties and the General Assembly to establish this process. Second, the process for addressing gaps and challenges is very open and framed in a way that allows for potentially much delay. We also know that the Vienna consensus negotiation process makes progress difficult. In fact, we had joined with nearly 100 NGOs to call on the UNGAS, as Vivian mentioned earlier, to create an intergovernmental expert working group to work on gaps. We had proposed that this working group be tasked with preparing concrete technical proposals for new frameworks and mechanisms. Unfortunately, UN member states decided not to create such a working group. So the process for addressing gaps and challenges remains unclear. These are two areas where work needs to be done, but it may take time. In terms of the options for addressing impunity for grand corruption, this could be pursued both within and outside UNCAC bodies. Given UNGAS's reluctance to set up an expert working group, the most promising solution may be for interested states and stakeholders to join forces to start work on proposals outside UNCAC processes. This is an approach that Transparency International adopted to generate support for the creation of an UNCAC review mechanism back when there was none. That was at a time when it was almost taboo to mention the word monitoring, just as the words grand corruption are taboo in Vienna now. The kind of multi-stakeholder working group outside the UNCAC process could involve delegations and stakeholders, not only from Vienna, but at the UN Center in Geneva. After all, a key feature of grand corruption is that it causes widespread violations of human rights. And experience shows that there's considerable concern in Geneva about the negative impact of corruption on the enjoyment of human rights. In fact, on the 31st of May this year, 6 human rights committees issued a joint statement on corruption and human rights that explicitly recognizes grand corruption and aspects of that problem. The Human Rights Council also regularly adopts resolutions on the negative impact of corruption on human rights. The multi-stakeholder working group could start by looking at a wide range of proposals for innovative solutions suggested by states, experts, and groups, including those in the Oslo Statement on Corruption Involving Vast Quantities of Assets, in the UN Secretariat Common Position to Address Global Corruption, in the FACTI panel report, the UN FACTI panel, and proposals from the International Bar Association Anti-Corruption Working Group, among others. Another input to the discussion would be Transparency International's legal definition of grand corruption that we're due to launch in the next month, together with proposals of national and international measures to better tackle grand corruption. We discuss in our new report that will be forthcoming possible new international and regional structures ranging from agencies to coordinate investigations and support to national prosecutors, to regional anti-corruption courts or an international anti-corruption court. Interested states and stakeholders could also work at national level to improve national legal frameworks for tackling grand corruption. But because of the global nature of the problem, collective solutions are preferable, such as through an agreement or protocol covering national measures and potentially new international structures. The bottom line is that we should take advantage of the opportunity for advances offered by the political declaration, but we should also look for opportunities outside processes of the UNCAC Conference of States Parties. And at the end of the day, in advancing the work on tackling grand corruption, a lot depends on us.
Thank you. You're putting down a gauntlet, putting a challenge for all of us. Well noted. I will now have question 2 from Matthias Hutter from the UNGAS Coalition. Matthias, can you elaborate on where do you see pathways for progress moving forward from UNGAS, and where else have you seen momentum in different intergovernmental fora for global anti-corruption? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. As Gillian mentioned, we really need to focus now on implementation and follow-up and ensuring that the commitments, even though many may not be fully sufficient, are implemented. Technically, the UNGAS did not foresee a real follow-up mechanism that would have been necessary to ensure a swift implementation of the commitments it includes. But the next step towards operationalizing some of the commitments will be the UNGAS Conference of States Parties that will take place in December of this year in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. And so in the run-up to this conference, states will develop and negotiate resolutions that will, so to say, operationalize and provide more details on how some of the commitments from the UNGAS should be implemented. So this is an opportunity for states to work together with civil society and with other stakeholders to really advance the anti-corruption agenda in this regard through the UNGAS Conference of States Parties, which is, so to say, the main body where the follow-up action will take place to the extent that it will take place. It was encouraging for us to see a stronger statement to the UNGAS from the G7 countries. The G7 countries notably really highlighted the role of civil society, of non-governmental stakeholders in anti-corruption efforts, which is an important message to send. And importantly for us as a civil society coalition, the G7 countries highlighted that they commit to involving civil society in their UNGAS review processes, and that they will publish the reports coming out of this process. The UNGAS really remains the engine for anti-corruption reforms, but unfortunately at this point it is not required that countries release the key documents from the review process. So a lot of it can remain secret, and they're not obliged to involve non-governmental stakeholders in this process. So ensuring a transparent and inclusive process can really be an engine for reforms and for successful anti-corruption efforts on the national level. We also see some progress, some indication of momentum on some of the policy issues. Gillian already highlighted some of them, but more and more countries are committing to real beneficial ownership transparency, even though the implementation of those commitments, those promises is not as fast as we hope it to be. More and more countries recognize that a lot of money can be saved by establishing truly transparent digital procurement procedures. Again, the implementation is not as fast as we would like it to see. But there's, for example, also momentum when it comes to whistleblower protection, as more European countries are implementing the EU whistleblower directive. But on many of these provisions, it's not enough to look at the laws that are reformed and adopted, but we need to look at implementation. Are these laws truly implemented? Are they enforced? And finally, another point of hope is asset recovery. We see that France, for example, is in the process of adopting a new law that would advance the return of assets to the country of origin. And we really hope that other countries will follow suit, will stick to their UNGAS commitments, and will work on advancing asset recovery. All those factors are crucial to detect and prevent impunity in grant corruption. But there is no single solution to addressing these challenges. I think we need to work on many policy topics to really have a complete package that tackles this global problem.
Thank you. Well noted. There's no one solution. There need to be many approaches, and implementation, operationalization, need to put it in place. Thanks very much, Matthias. One of the aspects you mentioned was whistleblower protection. I'd like to ping off that for my question two for Serena Ibrahim of Youth Against Corruption. Serena, what do you see as the role of whistleblowing and speak up systems in the fight against corruption?
Thank you, Vivian. Corruption is dreadful. It makes people vulnerable and directly affects their well-being, access to all kinds of services, whether public or private. It affects their physical, their mental health. It is especially felt in countries like mine, where it is systemic and becomes the norm. If you don't talk about it, if we don't talk about corruption, it drains us. And if we don't shed light of it, it keeps on growing and spreading until we can no longer control it, and it becomes so strong that it can deprive us from every single type of human being and human right. To weaken it, we must speak up and shed light to remove every darkness and ambiguity around it. Because as we all know, corruption's strength lies in the fact that it is complex and has no border and cannot be easily defined. By shedding light, we better define it and can hence better tackle it. However, this is all in theory. For people to have the courage to speak up and shed the light on corrupt incidents, protective and encouraging mechanisms should be put in place on a national level and in private and public organizations as well. More efforts should be done, first, to create a safe and enabling environment for people to speak up, to express themselves. Second, to provide incentives for people to raise their voices and to surpass the fears they have in shedding light or in expressing or in sharing any news about an incident that they have faced. Third, to recognize and complement whistleblowers' efforts, to shed light on the way they have initiated or they have raised their voice. Fourth, to create a whistleblowing mechanism or whistleblowing mechanisms that are clear, user-friendly, and secure. Fifth, to have mechanisms that are transparent and efficient. And finally, to process all the information from the collected data from whistleblowing and speak up mechanisms in a smart and effective way that could enable the design of proper solutions that would better control and prevent the rise of corrupt incidents in the same place but in other times. Thank you, Vivian.
Understood. That's very clear. Thank you so much for that. I would like to now move to closing remarks. We've heard from Gillian Dell of Transparency International, of the work of TI in addressing grand corruption, and a range of possible solutions for moving forward after UNGAS. Now, these options can possibly include actually working outside of UNGAS with interested states for implementation of global anti-corruption. This has also included the possibility of coordinating investigations among different states, which we've heard from many companies, members of ICC, a wish for better cross-border, cross-jurisdiction enforcement on investigations. And we've heard of different possibilities, including, and we've also heard it from Gillian on the link between anti-corruption and addressing business and human rights or human rights impacts, which interestingly is also being addressed by the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights in Geneva. We've heard from Matthias on the many wishes from UNGAS and how a lot remains to be done, about how sometimes it's useful to work in other fora, for example, G7, to include, to ensure more transparency and inclusiveness in processes. We've heard how there has, we've seen advancement on transparency and beneficial ownership. When we see the transparency and the ultimate owners of companies, that is obviously an important step towards transparency. And interestingly, there's movement on that in G20, B20 processes as well. And we've heard about the role of digital procurement and other also possible options for progress on asset recovery, including, as I understand it, forthcoming new French law. We've heard from Sirina Ibrahim of Youth Against Corruption about the importance of whistleblower systems. Some people call them speak up systems, some people call them feedback systems. Mainly, it's an important tool for integrity and transparency so that there can be alert systems to report on perceptions of wrongdoing. It doesn't have to just be corruption, and to be able to report it safely without the fear of retaliation. And we also heard about the new European whistleblower directive and how this reinforces the momentum behind whistleblowing systems in the fight against corruption. ICC has actually pioneered the business fight against corruption. And actually, we have just launched the revision of the ICC guidelines on whistleblowing to take into account, among other things, the new EU whistleblower directive. We've also have been honored that a number of ICC integrity tools have started to be used by the public sector, interestingly, including the ICC anti-corruption clause, which is starting to be used by a number of states for public procurement contracts. Thanks to this exchange of views, we've had a chance to hear of some advancements coming out of the UN General Assembly Special Session Against Corruption. And we've also heard of the many things that remain to be done. As we heard from ICC's first Vice Chair, Maria Fernanda Garza, in the opening remarks, only by challenging the status quo and pursuing new, stronger accountability mechanisms can we really move the needle in making integrity everyone's business. I would like to close this session by thanking our expert speakers. It's thanks to you that we have gotten all this knowledge to share with our audience, which I understand is close to 1,000 registered participants. I would like to thank Integrity Initiatives International for co-organizing this whole panel, but including this session today. And I would like to thank the audience for their input and engagement. This session is now closed. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm really pleased to have an esteemed panel. My name is Chip Cottrell. I'm going to moderate this group for the next 45 or 50 minutes. And the discussion topics are going to focus on what's the efforts that are underway to look at global, regional, and local anti-corruption efforts in civil society, in business, and in government. What can we do to make differences? What can we do to examine the wide range of anti-corruption laws, the regulations and policies? What else is needed? What should we stop doing? What can we be doing better? I'm really happy to have Anita Schiefer from Siemens Energy. We have Fernando Iglesias, who's joining us from the Chamber of Deputies in Argentina. We have Carlos Santiso, who is a Director of Digital Innovation in the Directorate, and Nicola Bonucci, who is really a legend in this field with background at OECD, and he's now at Paul Hastings, the international law firm. I'm going to ask each of the participants to spend just a couple minutes giving their background and their connection and passion into this particular topic, and we'll start with Anita.
Yeah, thank you, Chip. My name is Anita Schiefer. I'm the Chief Compliance Officer of Siemens Energy. I joined Siemens almost 20 years ago and helped in overcoming the compliance crisis, building up the compliance system at Siemens, then spent 2 years in private practice, amongst other topics, working on a compliance monitorship. And now I'm back, and Siemens Energy has been spun off from Siemens, and we are our own group of company now. And of course, the energy business is an environment where passion about anti-corruption is important.
For sure. Thank you, Anita. Carlos.
Yes, hi, Chip, and also thank you for AAA and the International Chamber of Commerce for the invitation. I'm Carlos Santizo. I'm the Director of Digital Innovation in Government at the Development Bank of Latin America. I'm based here in Bogota, in Colombia, covering the region. And I'm also doing some work with the World Economic Forum. There's a group, the Global Future Council on Anti-Corruption and Transparency, that does some work. And I've been working on governance and anti-corruption for the last 20 years or so. And one of the things that is like, I think is a game changer in the last 5-10 years has been the use of tech as an instrument, as a tool, as an ally of integrity. And in particular, part of the tech revolution in the integrity space, you have especially the role of data. And I think that's what I'm going to talk about in this talk, about how data and technology have become a game changers in the integrity space.
Oh, thank you, Carlos. Fernando. You're on mute, Fernando.
Sorry, I didn't want to disturb. So, thank you for the invitation. My name is Fernando Iglesias. I'm an Argentine. I'm also an Italian and Spanish citizen. Well, no, I am the president of the committee about Mercosur of the Chamber of Deputies. I am a member, a parliamentarian of the Law Chamber in Argentina. But I am also very active in the civil society field. I am basically a writer specialized on the impact of globalization over the political system, the national political system. And as a writer and a journalist, I was invited to be part of the chamber. This is my second mandate, but I am also active with the World Federalist Movement. I am the co-president together with Joy Ashworthy, that I think you know, a former Minister of Foreign Affairs in Canada. And I'm part also of the Democracia Global, which is a small organization here in Buenos Aires, working together with academics, with politicians, with civil society, about this matter of corruption and criminal organization and so on. So basically, this is my different fields of activities. I'm very happy to join this initiative, and I hope to make some contribution on my specific topic, which is the globalization and what's going on through globalization. What's the link between many of the new phenomena we are looking at the international scale, which are directly connected with technology, economy, and globalization.
Thank you, Fernando. Nicola.
Yeah, Chip, hello, and thank the organizers indeed for having this very interesting panel at a very topical moment, I would say, because we are, 1 month after the conclusion of the United Nations General Assembly special session, first ever United Nations General Assembly special session on the fight against corruption. So my name is Nicola Bonucci. I don't know if I'm a legend, but I'm old enough to having followed basically the first green shot of this fight against corruption around 30 years ago. I'm actually today celebrating my 61st anniversary. So I've been spending really virtually half of my life looking at those issues, both from the OECD point of view. I was in the Legal Directorate and General Counsel of the OECD for 26 years. And as you pointed out, I left the OECD around 1.5 years ago to join the private sector, which is a very interesting move and gives me a new angle for looking at those issues, and goes very well in what you were saying about what other stakeholders than states can do in this fight against corruption. And I'm interested in seeing that, by the way, in this panel, there is no government representative. And I think it's an interesting also policy choice, because I'm sure it's not by accident that you have composed the panel like that. So looking forward to this hour of discussion and to interact with all the other panelists.
Thank you, Nicola. You know, it brings to mind, you talked 30 years. We are in just this month, the 30-year anniversary of the fall of BCCI, Bank of Credit and Commerce International, which in my career, also been doing this a little over 65 years, and years old, not 65 years of working, I promise you. But that actually consumed a very significant part of my life very early on, and shaped the efforts that I have invested over the years. I have the pleasure to be here on behalf of III, Integrity Initiative International, and I am very excited about the process that we're working on together with the International Chamber of Commerce. So I echo those welcome thoughts. I have spent the better part of my career either as a forensic accountant or helping to look at the various components around what means good governance, what is good accountability, what is good transparency. And I was quite fortunate to have an extended career at Deloitte and Touche, where I left as the chief ethics officer, and am now, after a mandatory retirement, I might add, to working with Holland & Knight International law firm based in Miami, where I have really the opportunity to leverage this in a very similar way to Nicola doing it at Paul Hastings. So Nicola, I'm going to go to you first, though, with all of your knowledge around OECD and global leadership. There's been a lot of calls for increasing the legal aspects of it and the enforcement aspects against corrupt leaders. You know, this is something that III is very vocal about. It's also ICC is very vocal about. You're seeing it from a little different perspective now after 26 years on the legal side, and you're leading the anti-corruption committee for the International Bar. What are some things that are going on there? How does it relate to UNGAS? How does it relate to what some of the initial efforts are, or what the current efforts are, rather, going forward?
Yeah, thank you, Chip, for your question. So again, you know, I will try to summarize 30 years in 30 seconds, but basically, since the adoption of the OECD Anti-Bribery Convention, I think the last 20 years have been an incredible period of improvement of the legal framework, both internationally and domestically. And I would say that, yes, you know, there are still loopholes, there are still points to be addressed. Not all the countries are exactly at the same level in terms of legal framework. But by and large, I would say the main issue that the international community is facing today is not really the legal framework, is more the implementation, the enforcement, the effectiveness of such legal frameworks. And indeed, III have been focusing its attention in particular on what we used to call in the OECD the demand side, which is the passive corruption. I think a lot of focus, and Anita knows this very well, a lot of focus has been put on the supply side, on the briber, much less so on the bribee. Just to give you an indication, a couple of years ago, the OECD produced a report which analyzed the cases in which the briber was from a party to the Convention of the OECD, and the bribee was also a citizen from a country which is party to the Convention of the OECD. There were 50 or some cases. out of the 500 cases, so 10%. So in those 10% of the cases, both the briber and the bribee were parties to the OECD Anti-Bribery Convention. In all those cases, the briber, most typically the company, but sometimes the individual, had been sanctioned in all those 50 cases. Out of those 50 cases, only 20% the bribee had been sanctioned. And here we are talking only between parties to the OECD Anti-Bribery Convention, which are supposed to be the best pupil in town in this respect. So I think there is indeed an issue with respect to the domestic supply, corruption, the demand side of the corruption. And naturally, there is a particular issue and the more visible one when you deal with what Transparency International used to call grand corruption, i.e. corruption which is basically the head of a state, the head of a government, or someone very close to that, the situation of state captors, family captors that we know exist in some countries. And what is the situation today? The situation today is that this matter is addressed, I would say, on a very scattered way and not totally satisfactory. Let me give you two examples. One example are the French legal actions that have been introduced by several civil society organizations. The famous cases known as the bien mal acquis, the misappropriated goods, which are leading to some interesting results, but it's one country in a particular context. And the other way to do it is, in a sense, I would say, the US way, which is to use the provision of the CPA or similar provisions that may exist in the UK Bribery Act, or even the Sapin 2, and trying to reach out abroad, mostly though vis-a-vis the supply side more than the demand side. But there have been cases of enforcement of CPA provisions, not FCPA strictly, but in cases related to CPA vis-a-vis the demand side. But again, those are very limited initiatives and purely domestic. So it's not an ideal. It's not an ideal world. III has therefore campaigned for the creation of an international anti-corruption court. The IBA, and indeed, I was the chair of the IBA Anti-Corruption Committee. I'm still in the Anti-Corruption Committee, but not as chair anymore. The IBA has also put a proposal to the United Nations General Assembly special session, a bit more, maybe less dramatic than the III proposal, but effectively trying to reach out to the same result, which is, okay, how we can deal with this kind of situation. And the proposal of the IBA is to basically set up an independent mechanism, UN, in the framework of the UN, but independent, naturally, in particular independent from the control of states, to deal with those kind of issues, both in terms of investigation, prosecution, and possibly sanction. The principle is that this mechanism should work only with the principle that everybody knows in the European Union of what we call the subsidiarity, i.e., only in cases in which the domestic laws or the domestic legal action is not happening for whatever reasons. And I think it's probably better to avoid trying to understand why domestic legal action is not happening, because there are a variety of reasons. So in that case, this mechanism could be triggered. The idea is, as I said, that this would be an independent unit and within the UN framework. And this could deal with both the issue of sanctioning, in particular, the physical person, but also with the other big challenge that I would like to touch upon in my concluding remarks, which is the asset recovery. This is an area in which I can say that the 2005 Convention of Merida was a breakthrough, an incredible breakthrough, something which almost was unexpected. I was one of those who didn't believe that there could be a consensus on that, and I was very, very happy to be proven to be wrong. But at the same time, let's be realistic. Since the Merida Convention, not much progress has been made in terms of the effectiveness of asset recovery. Yes, again, there are domestic initiatives like the Swiss legislation or the UK. Actually, as we speak, France is discussing introducing a legislation also very much based on the Swiss model that hopefully will be adopted by the end of July for asset recovery. But I think we are still facing, again, a scattered enforcement mechanism. So the idea behind the IBA proposal was that in terms of enforcement, we need something which is more international, more neutral, independent, above states, to ensure an effective level playing. So is this realistic? Is this feasible? Well, you may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. And I hope someday you will join us and the world will be as one.
That's a great way to put a cap on a very difficult topic, and it's got the components, as many of us who have been dealing with this for a long time have seen, that there seems to be hurdles. The hurdles seem to be getting higher and higher each time. But we also seem to be jumping a little bit higher each time. So, you know, as we look at that, I understand, and I've got a lot of understanding and empathy, having seen some of the ownership transparency changes here in the United States that are being promulgated, and in Canada, as well as the rest of the world. And I think they all kind of link into that. So, Nicola, thank you for those thoughts. We'll come back to some of those in just a second. Anita, I'm going to turn to you next, and there have been some, you know, lots of different questions around the process itself, and what can organizations, people, civil society, governments be doing a little bit different. But I know that one of the focuses has been around the importance of due diligence and looking at some of the functional areas. Talk to me a little bit about that anti-corruption framework. How are you doing things at Siemens Energy, and what kind of progression do you see coming here?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Chip. So I think due diligence is really at the core of every compliance system, and it's becoming more and more important, be it in the area of either anti-corruption or anti-money laundering or human rights or corporate responsibility. So all these areas are also growing more closely together, I think, and due diligence becomes increasingly important. It has always been, but I think it's even more important now. So as in our case, for businesses who deal with third parties in their daily business, it's very important to have a robust process in place and not invent the wheel new each time, but really have a working process which also withstands the test later on of an authority or your own internal audit or whomever. So I think it's crucial really that nowadays we also utilize technology and the tools that are available, digital tools, for instance, for as the first step to obtain all relevant information that's out there, then to use it, to really exploit it in a systematic way. and also to screen all the data and evaluate it. That can be supported, for instance, if you have various parties and partners, you want to discover if there are any patterns or if partners do services which are cross-border and maybe do not have a substantial value add. That you can see that maybe in the contract documents, but you can also support all these analyses electronically nowadays, and I think you should. And also the monitoring, there are databases out there where which you can use to monitor your third parties on a long-term basis. And I think nowadays companies really have to make a call how they want to implement these technologies of course, in a reasonable and appropriate way. I'm not saying every small enterprise has to implement everything, but at least you have to see what is there and how you can use it and design a robust process. On the other hand, I still find it sometimes hard to obtain the reliable information because it varies very much from country to country, which kind of information you can get, what is available. And that puts a huge burden on the honest businesses who want to make business and want to do it right. And so I think it would be important to have information available that is reliable and transparent and accessible in registers. And it would really help the companies who want to make a decision, because, I mean, you know, when you don't find anything, it's the absence of red flags, but that alone does not support a robust decision at the end of a due diligence process. That can also be a red flag in itself. And so I think more robust information and transparent register information would be helpful. And also it might help if we could have something like trusted compliance ratings for companies, for instance, comparable to credit ratings that could support, not substitute, but support companies' compliance due diligence efforts if they could at least partially rely on work that someone has already done and verified, I think. So for me, due diligence is really crucial. And it's not one size fits all. It has to work, and we have to see what technology can really do to help us. We are also exploring blockchain and other opportunities here. It's still very early stage, I think, but to me, this is really key to deal with all the information that is there.
Well, thank you, Anita. And that kind of takes us in a road looking at information. You know, more information is and going to be helpful both in terms of evaluating, but also perhaps in defining and looking at new kinds of programs. So, Carlos, you know, in your role as the director in at the Development Bank of Latin America for digital innovation, talk to us a little bit about some of the things that you're seeing, including some of the things maybe that you've come across that Anita is talking about in a third-party validation and also third-party due diligence as it relates. And I will remind you, you're on mute.
Yes, no, thanks, Chip. And it's actually good to follow up from Anita. I mean, because basically a lot of the things around a lot of hope that is putting on new technologies and especially data insights about the potential in the anti-corruption field is huge, but there's also a lot of hype. No, I mean, in terms of like what is going to actually work or not, and in terms of finding scalable solutions. But I think here we have a story of the geeks entering the anti-corruption field. And you might remember a couple of years ago, there was a big scandal, a big corruption scandal called the Panama Papers that were originated from a law firm in Panama called Mossack Fonseca that was doing a lot of work for trying to, to manage a lot of illicit financial flows going around from individuals and companies. And actually, there was a lot of information out there that was leaked to the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, but what was also quite interesting in this case is how tech companies, especially tech startups, have helped journalists to make sense of all these data lakes all around there. And you might remember there was a company, like a French company, which is called Lincurious, that did a lot of social media analysis, just like to connect the dots. Who were these people? Where are they coming from? Where are the flows going to? And there was also another Swedish company, a Swedish startup that called Neo Technology that was also helping make sense of all this data. So what has happened there is that you had a lot of much more data out there that could be mined and that could be used to make sense of things that were uncovered in the past. And what Anita was also making reference to, I mean, you have a lot of more data that is generated by companies, but also that is available out there. And I think what is changing now is the availability of making sense of a lot of this data by different kind of companies, including tech startups. So I think there's a lot of potential in this field on how, and a lot of opportunities to build public-private partnerships around tech solutions for integrity and against corruption. And with the COVID crisis, we've seen an acceleration of this movement around applying new technologies to a whole series of processes, initially meant to reduce interactions, to reduce physical interactions, in the provision of services or in the delivery of services in the companies, but that we're also generating a lot of more data about what was actually going on. And you also have a much more computational capabilities of making sense of all this information out there in different ways. And in particular, artificial intelligence is really also a big game changer in the integrity field in terms of trying to understand what is going on, for example, around issues on public procurement or government contracts. And maybe one way to look at it is like in 2-3 different ways. One is for companies and businesses to really invest in tech for integrity in that sense. And Anita was making a lot of reference to that, but that requires a couple of things from companies. One is really a mind shift, understanding your data as an asset that you can use for generating value, but also an asset that you can use in your compliance function, also an internal integrity mechanism. And that requires having data policies, not only about opening data and making your company more transparent in some of these business processes, but really to have a policies around how you can use the data that is generated, including by your subsidiaries in your sort of business intelligence functions. That also requires that compliance officers or integrity officers work much more closely with data officers in companies, so that they can also make much more value, internal value, not only in terms of generating value for the market, but also value for integrity function within the companies. And you see that in a different type of functions. Anita was already mentioning one around the improving the due diligence process and the know your customer. With a combination of digital identity, digital payments, for example, it's easier to do due diligence functions and know your customers type of due diligence. But you also can use a lot of this information to have a better risk management or risk mapping strategies in your companies, for example, in terms of looking at risk exposure through your providers. And one of the area that also we're seeing a lot of things happening is in the regulatory field in terms of the abilities of companies to comply with regulations. And a lot of companies called in this space that are called RegTechs or subtechs that are also starting to help companies being better at compliance and especially with regulations. And I think in the World Economic Forum, we're also doing some more work around the ESG functions in companies, and especially how you can strengthen the G in the ESG functions. And that goes beyond the sort of issues around corporate governance, but also about integrity and how you make your company more like Anita was mentioning, like an ISO type of standard in terms of how smart you are at ensuring integrity. But you also have a lot of spaces for companies working with governments in different areas that are benefiting both using a lot of these new technologies and information. I was mentioning, for example, there's a lot of changes in the regulatory policies and the way governments are regulating and the way companies are complying with regulations. For example, nowadays crowdsourcing techniques and technologies can help having much better inputs in the regulatory processes upstream, including by companies and those who are then have to comply with these regulations. So there's a lot of movement around smart regulation that is able to mine much more inputs from people and from the companies in the process. Before, you have a lot of consultations, but that were not necessarily used, no? And you also have like companies that are better at using RegTech technologies to ensure that they comply with regulations. For example, in Mexico, the National Banking and Stock Commission has been partnering with a RegTech startup to also improve the way it does its anti-money laundering due diligence. You have other ways that are very interesting, and there's a lot of partnerships around those solutions between governments and companies around the world is around cash. I mean, a lot of issues around corruption evolve around cash. And so if you start to take cash out of your economies, you reduce opportunities for corruption. And there's a lot of movement around digital transactions that are going to cashless economies. Countries like India, for example, have taken a lot of cash bills out of their economies, also to not only to improve digital payments and transfers, but also to reduce black money into the market. And then there's an alliance that is called Better Than Cash Alliance, in which companies like Unilever are participating, and they're really trying to take monies out of cash. I mean, take cash out of economies. And this is really an interesting thing, because with the crisis, and that's where some of the opportunities come from, these cash transfer digital payments have increased quite significantly. Another area which also has been unblocked somehow by the crisis has been around digital identity. And some countries didn't really wanted to have national universal digital identity systems or digital identity systems for variety number of reasons, and this is changing gradually. And the more you generalize digital-based identity, the easier it becomes then to do due diligence or know your customer, and then also having much more grasp on who are, for example, the owner of different companies. So there's a lot of movement there also that is quite interesting, and the HLPF is also starting to see how a digital identity can be used as an appropriate ways to do due diligence. But and just to conclude, there's also some movement the other way around in terms of how you can strengthen companies' commitments to be more open about their information, their data. For example, there's a lot of movement around the open corporate data, and there's an initiative called the Open Corporates that is trying to help companies open corporate data that is of non-commercial value, and that can also then be used by other integrity actors in their integrity functions. And I think there we have a long way to go in terms of opening corporate data, in terms of beneficial ownership, board membership, asset declaration, for example, meetings with lobbyists, this kind of information, or tax records, and this kind of information that is not of commercial value, but that can also be used by other actors in terms of flagging some of the risks that are out there, especially in terms of tax evasion and money laundering. And the last one, just to conclude there, where also we see a lot of potential, and we've seen that during the crisis, especially in the health sector in cities, but it's also a lot of governments also are asking, and there's a movement to ask companies to disclose data that is what is called of public interest or public value. And we've seen that in the crisis with the telecom companies, for example, where some of the data was quite useful to trace and track the COVID. But there's a lot of movement around, establishing rules of engagement or new mechanisms through which business can share its data with governments, because it's of public value beyond the integrity function or beyond the use by the company. For example, France has adopted a bill a couple of years ago in 2016 called the Digital Republic Bill, which included this notion of public interest data that the European Union now is also taking forward, of data that is owned by companies, but that has a value for the common good, and that can be used. And the European Union, there's a lot of discussion now in the European Union around data policy and artificial intelligence in particular. And one of the recommendations of an expert group on business to government data sharing is precisely trying to build mechanisms, data trust or other types of mechanisms through which companies and businesses, especially in sensitive areas, can share some of their non-commercial data with governments so that they improve some of the policy responses. That goes beyond the sort of integrity function, but it's also maybe a reflection that this whole world of data is really changing fast and has accelerated with the pandemic in the different ways we look at it. And I think there's a call also for corporates to be part of this movement to join these forces to try to see how we can make better public value and better social value of data that is used by companies.
Carlos, that's really interesting. I'm a firm believer in the paradigm shift on technology, and I love the way you're talking about how the geeks have got into integrity, which I'm seeing from a number of different perspectives, including some of the pushes that we've talked a little bit about ownership transparency. And there's been a lot of young people who are in tech have been pushing for that and were involved in lobbying and making some of the changes that are promoting there. But I think the key there is the collaboration between the public side, the private side, and generational issues that are driving things. I'm going to shift gears here just a little bit and turn to Fernando. And Fernando, you're coming at this from a globalization perspective and looking at this from looking at whether or not it's on a regional basis or taking some of those ideas and broadening it. And there's a campaign in Latin America to look at prosecuting transnational crime, which I am assuming would include corruption. Can you talk a little bit about that and to establish this program, and how might that regional court differ from maybe looking at some of the things that we're examining at the III perspective or the ICC perspective?
Well, thank you very much. Basically, Anita and Carlos pointed about the problem of information. And the problem of information is a huge one, because we are in our life, in our time life, we are living in a big change from a past society which is dying and a new one which is rising. We are changing from societies which were based on the national state and the industrialism as a form of production. We are going towards a new frame in which it's not national but global. It's not anymore about industry, it's about the society, global society of information, knowledge, etc. And this is a huge change. Speaking about information, for instance, Odebrecht is a big company who built infrastructure all over Latin America. They have a structure and they corrupted all the politicians in Latin America for doing their business. Some years ago, they are from Brazil. The Brazilian court had some action and people went to jail and etc., etc. But they had information about what Odebrecht has done all over Latin America. And the national government, the Argentine government, asked them to the Brazilian judges, give this information. This is important for us in order to prosecute people here who have committed corruption crimes. And the Brazilian court is no, because we have an agreement with those who have testified against that people, those persons, and you don't. So I cannot give you any information, even if very valuable against corruption, and you are going to use this because you could prosecute the people who testified against Odebrecht here, and we have a deal with them in order to exchange the information for better conditions. This is the imbalance in which we are living. So the company Odebrecht is global. The crimes they committed are regional, but the court are national, and they cannot exchange information. And this is an imbalance of power, which is tremendous. This is the reason, in my opinion, for which the problem of corruption is so important right now, because it's destroying democracy, and it's creating a feel in citizens that the democracies and the political system are all corrupted, and we need to go to new messianic leaders and national populists, etc., etc. This is a huge, huge problem. And Nicola said something about the famous John Lennon song, and the world will live as one. The problem we are facing, that the world is living as one in technology, we are living as one in economy, but we are living in 200 separated states all over the world, doing each of these states our business. So the result is they are powerful. You know, the mafias are powerful. They control the global landscape. They have connection all over. They move like in the digital frame. They have high technology, and we are fighting with the instruments we created during the 19th century. This is ridiculous. And this is, in my opinion, the thing in which we should intervene. So, because the political structure of the war is the political structure which was born after the Second World War. Basically, we did a big step forward when we created United Nations at the global level and the European Union at the regional level. And this was enough in order to avoid the hell. The second secretary of the United Nations, Swedish man, can't pronounce Swedish, but he said that the United Nations had been created in order to avoid the hell, not to create paradise, not to create a paradise, but to avoid the hell. But this structure was very valid to avoid the hell during 7 decades. But now we are facing global trouble like the pandemic, global trouble like climate change, global trouble and crisis like organized crime and corruption, of course, which are directly connected. And we need to build the instruments in order to give and to deal with this global crisis. And this doesn't mean to create a world state or no. We need to apply. It's very simple. We have to apply to the global level. And when I say global level, I don't mean only world. I mean the global, the regional, the national. This is global. We need to apply two rules which we consider valid at the national level, which are federalism and democracy. And that's the problem, how to build institutions at the global level and at the regional level in order to cope with this kind of problem. That's why the proposal, I'm very sympathetic with the proposal of creating an United Nations Anti-Corruption Court. This is the global level. I participated in Colombia in a very interesting seminar with all the people who were pushing this perspective. And I said then, and I repeat, the World Federalist Movement is happy to join the effort and to participate. But we created something at the regional level, which is the project of creating a Latin American and Caribbean International Criminal Court against transnational crimes. And this is very simple. We, the World Federalists, we had a very interesting experience for the creation of the International Criminal Court. For 20 years, we were the conveners, and we were, in my opinion, the crucial part of civil society fighting for having this trial in order to judge people who committed crimes against humanity. We want something very similar, but not at the global level, but at the regional level, and not based on the Statute of Rome, crimes against humanity, but on the Palermo Convention. It's a United Nations convention that all the countries in Latin America are part, and the idea is just enforce the Convention Palermo through a regional court, because the problem of corruption and the problem of organized crime, which are directly connected, are at least regional. Latin America is the worst place in the world in these matters of corruption in one way and transnational crime. Think about in Mexico, about 30,000 people die about every year for crimes connected with transnational crime, drug trafficking, human trafficking, etc., and 60,000 die every year in Brazil. Now the things are getting a little better, but it's changing. But we are speaking about a genocide. This is a situation in Latin America, which is, I am speaking about Mexico, which is half of Central America, and Brazil, which is half of South America. So the situation is very bad for all the rest of Latin America, because if we don't fight against this phenomena in Brazil and Mexico, we are impotent. At the end, we are going to be in the same situation. And we are starting. This is happening right now. So the idea of the COPLA, of the Latin American Criminal Court against organized crime, is about to create a court at the regional level to establish connection between all the prosecutors, national office, and to create also a regional officer. I had been living for 7 years in Italy. My first year was 1987 in Reggio Calabria, which was the worst moment of mafia crimes in Italy till now. I was there, and so the distortion of human life, the distortion of relationship about human beings because of mafia was a real impact for me. I had come from Argentina, not from Switzerland, but I was impressed by that. And we created also another mechanism, which is the International Anti-Mafia Seminar between Italy and Argentina, Italian-Argentine Anti-Mafia Seminar, and we are exchanging experience with the Italian parliamentarians, and we took the example of the creation of the DNEA, the Direzione Nazionale Antimafia, which was an initiative of Falcone a long time ago. He was murdered, you remember. I was in Sicily when he was murdered. I was living in Sicily, so a big experience too. So, I mean, this idea of connecting all the prosecutors of Italy was very important in order to calm down the situation and to solve the violence in Italy. We need to do something similar with all the prosecutors in Latin America to create connection, to exchange information. So when I was a child, and I'm closing because I'm speaking too much, but when I was a child, I was, one of the things we did in Argentina was watching cowboy series and television, the cowboy, all these legend. Well, one of the interesting scenes on that was when the thief, when the criminal crossed the Rio Bravo, because he was escaping from justice, you know? And justice was very close. They are going to catch the thief. We are going to put the criminal in jail. Then the criminal crossed the Rio Bravo. He was not anymore in the United States, but in Mexico, and he mocked, you know, to the justice. This is what is happening now. They are mocking of our national systems. And of course, it's very valid and very important, the participation at the national level, et cetera, et cetera. But if we don't create something at the regional level, meaning a Latin American criminal court against corruption, and at the global level, an anti-corruption court, we are, in the end, we are going to fail, because we're fighting with people who are living in the 21st century, and we are using the ideas and the technology and the strategies of the two centuries ago. That's why we created this initiative. It was very successful. I don't want to bore you about everything, where we had resolutions from the Argentine chamber, the Argentine Senate, the chamber of Paraguay, the president of my country, the former president of my country, Mauricio Macri, my party, was pushing this idea at the United Nations General Assembly, and we had a big structure, many civil society organizations who are volunteering for creating a coalition, and we are preparing also a statute to propose, and we had many other signatories and participants, and trying to connect each other, because this is the real problem, how to join everybody and to put our efforts together to change the architecture of the institutional frame in which we are fighting it. Thank you very much.
Oh, Fernando, that we could go on for another 3 hours just on this particular topic. But in light of our time, we've got 7-8 minutes left here, and there have been some questions that have come in. So I'm going to throw out a couple of these questions, and I'm going to roll around between the four of you to see if you have any thoughts or particular observations here. The first one had to do with whether or not the reforms that we're talking about and potentially strengthening the criminal laws, do we need to make sure that we go after the leaders for kleptocracy, as well as we talk about the E's and the O's, and whether or not that makes sense from the corporate perspective, how that going to be flipped around, or whether or not it makes sense from a more civil society and government perspective. The second thing maybe kind of runs around this and has to do with the trust. How much of this is really embodied in some of the issues that we're facing with around trust? I know that the World Economic Forum is working on future trust initiatives. I know that there are trust initiatives within the United Nations, and specifically the United States and Canada and the UK have also looked at these areas, particularly as it relates to anti-corruption and kleptocracy efforts. So I might go to Nicola, you first on this, and see if you have any comments. And I've got 5 other questions here, and perhaps we can deal with this on a different Zoomcast. But I'll start with you, Nicola, on these 2.
Well, very quickly, Chip, because indeed time is running. With respect to the question of going around the leaders, yeah, we need to find ways to have leaders accountable. At the same time, I think we should not necessarily exclusively focus our attention only on leaders. There is a lot of corruption which happens at the medium-sized level and at the petty level. Actually, you know, for most of the day-to-day habitant of Argentina, Colombia, or Italy, is more the day-to-day corruption, and this is where the borderline between corruption, cronies, nepotism is very thin and not always very easy to draw. And this is also where all of us, and really say all of us, have also to be self-conscious of ourselves, because how many times any of us has used personal connection to get something more quicker and faster than compared to having to go through the lines or fill in the questionnaire. So I think the question of looking at the leaders is vital, because, and this leads to the, and I'm going to say a few words on trust, but let's don't forget the importance and this disruption of medium-sized corruption and even petty corruption on the day-to-day life of people. On the question of trust, I think this is where the question of leader is essential, because indeed, if leaders are never facing charges, then you undermine the level of trust in the institution. You undermine the level of trust that people have in states. You foster, you favor improper behavior, and if the leader can escape, why should I abide by the law? But the question of trust is also something which is easy to identify, and everybody identifies, but very, very difficult to fix and to correct. And we should also not undermine that a number of the studies that we all use are perception studies, and they also have their own bias. And when you, for example, you confront the perception studies with, okay, and how many times have you really confronted with a solicitation for bribes? The results can sometimes be stunningly different. So people have the perception 85% everybody is corrupted, and then when you ask people how many times in your day-to-day life in the last year had you to face a solicitation, then only 10% of the people respond, which is not, again, it's not acceptable. But I think we need to understand that also.
Thank you, Anita.
Yes, of course. I think it's absolutely important that honest businesses also prioritize the enforcement of criminal laws and judicial reform, because I think it's clear that they are hindered from doing honest business in countries where corruption prevails, and so it's in their absolute interest to promote reforms. And also, without an effective judicial system, enforcement will go and punishment of corruption will go unpunished or not be effectively punished, and this will lead to an endless cycle of corrupt activities. Well, what you referred to before, Nicola and Fernando, I think is very important to point out that, of course, also the corrupt leader may try to hinder any efforts for judicial reform, and so the institution of an international court or enforcement mechanism, I think, would really be very helpful. This might, on the one hand, it might send a clear message that this conduct is not acceptable from an international perspective, and also it will help a neutral and independent body to review allegations of corruptions against leaders, and it would also further legitimize the local framework and judicial system, which ideally would then mirror the internationally accepted principles. So yes, from my perspective, it's really important also from a business perspective to create that kind of level playing field. Also, I think it's important because it would incentivize the private sector to invest in local economies. I mean, we all know that corruption hinders growth, and that investment is necessary for large projects which help a society develop. So if there are no investors, and also there's no economic climate and situation where you can safely invest, this will in the end be harmful for the development of whole societies, and that's an important aspect too, I think. Yeah, and finally, I mean, now we talked about the demand side a lot, which I appreciate, but also addressing the corrupt leaders on the supply side, of course, is still important to create accountability for corruption and to send a message to the honest businesses and to safeguard their interests and as well the interests of employees and of customers and other stakeholders.
Thank you, Anita. And just have a couple minutes left. I'm going to run to Fernando and give the two of you and Carlos the opportunity to have the last word here around and either the trust or the collaborative question that came back. Go ahead, Carlos.
Carlos first. Okay. Yeah. No, I just wanted to come back to one of the points that important points that Nicola made around the issue of trust. And obviously grant corruption is a big concern, but we should not forget about petty corruption, about the everyday bribery that is really affecting people's trust in governments, people trust in their institutions, and especially in developing countries and emerging economies. This is really a big problem. For example, in Latin America, 1 out of 3 people are paying bribes to get a service that they have that they can really have access to. In Mexico, it's estimated that bribery and red tape, bribery in terms of service delivery and red tape is eating 3 to 4% of GDP at the federal level. And this is really a huge problem in a lot of countries. And really, this is really a problem of that is challenging trust. And I think that's where digitalization can really be a really good ally. And don't get me wrong, I think digitalization can help and better data can help, but it will not solve the problem because somebody has to act on it. It's not like so integrity actors need to have better information, better insights. That information from digitalization and data improves, but at the end somebody has to act on that information. But one of the second point I wanted to make about digitalization is that sometimes, especially now in the crisis, a lot of governments are accelerating the digital transformation of their public services and a lot of their payment systems and so on and so forth. And there's a huge acceleration of these processes. And what we find out in a lot of countries is that digital transformation strategies in governments are sometimes better anti-corruption strategies because they are not called anti-corruption strategies and they can have more lasting effects. Just like thinking of Fernando, I mean, when you take Argentina during the Macri presidency, they've gone digital and they ended the use of paper in the bureaucracy. And you say, well, what does that mean? That means that you cannot really you have less opportunities to fiddle with that paper, and you have better information about what's going wrong in a lot of these processes. So taking out paper out of the system was really a huge step forward that the government of Macri did in Argentina. And they've applied that in the business environment, the productive sectors in particular, where they have combined digitalization of processes and simplification of administrative procedures and regulations. And they've eliminated 600 norms that did not make sense. Yeah. And that were used for other purpose than to enforce regulations. If you see, there were really opportunities for bribery, and that has saved Argentina over $2 billion in terms of additional costs. So the point there is that digitalization really helps, and sometimes helps anti-corruption because it's not called anti-corruption, but it's actually anti-corruption, especially for petty bribery, and it also puts the finger around the importance of data, not in itself, but as a tool for integrity actors to use. But that also then puts a lot of emphasis about making sure that the data you're using is good data, that you have good registries. There's a lot of talk about, for example, beneficial ownership registries and all kinds of registries. The Open Data Charter, for example, says that there's 30 databases that are key for anti-corruption, like beneficial ownership. But you need to make damn sure that the information is good, is correct, and is right. Because if you use wrong information, you'll get wrong outcomes. And therefore, it also puts more onus on the different actors to improve the quality of information that then can be reused.
Absolutely. those are really key points. And I think, Fernando, it gives the opportunity for you to take us home here at the end, at the end here. You're on mute.
Sorry. Well, you know, this is true. What Carlos said, we fixed everything. We changed the structure from paper to digital in order to allow citizen control, civil society control about, you know, how the government was managing the money and all the related matters. The first thing that the new government did was cancellate the thing and coming back to papers. Papers are very good, you know. You put the paper there and you hope the person who has made an initiative or something with the government to come, oh, where is my paper? Oh, let's think about, you know, it's all over my table, you know. Do you want the paper accelerates or you want the paper to remain there for years? You know, paper is very good. But the real problem is we should have an international standard, you know. This is something basic. This thing that my current government did at the national level should be avoided by the international community. You can't do that. If you do that, you are out of global commerce. You cannot, you know, we need to create these structures. We have the World Trade Organization, and this is very good and okay, but maybe this is something connected with transparency in operations. You don't want, do you want to operate with criminals? So if not, you have to be digital. That's a point. And we are coming back to the previous point, the imbalance and the fact that there is a concept in politics which is closeness. Close. We have to be. I am a politician. I have to be close to my comrades, to my fellows, to the people here in my neighborhood. But closeness is also a problem. Why? It's a problem because if you are close to the citizens here, you are close also to the mafia here. And the mafia goes to your office and say, well, what do you want? What metal you prefer? The metal of the bullets or gold? You know, this is the alternative you have. So that's why I think international institutions, Latin American Criminal Court, Anti-Corruption Court, which are not close, they are distant. In this case, this is an advantage because you cannot be so easy manipulated. Of course, they are going to create something in order to, of course, we know that. But closeness is in some way is a very good thing, but also it's a dangerous thing when you are dealing with corruption and we are dealing with mafia. And this has nothing to mean against the national level. The idea of creating, the idea of institutional building at the regional global level is not to replace national levels. It's about helping the national level of justice and politics to deal with this global process, global flux of information, money, people, drugs, etc. That's why I'm enthusiastically support the idea of the anti-corruption court at the United Nations. And let's think about what we can do in order to help each other, because I think these are two initiatives which are complementary.
I don't think I could end it in a better way. Fernando, thank you very much. I want to thank each of the participants. I want to thank you, the viewers, for being with us today. Those of you that did not get your questions answered, watch for a directed response. Thank you, Carlos, Nicola, Anita, and Fernando for joining us, and for ICC and the III for putting this on. Have a good day.
Hello, my name is Claudia Escobar. I am a former judge from Guatemala, and I work on anti-corruption efforts now from the United States, where I am affiliated to George Mason University. I think this is a key moment to promote stronger rules of anti-corruption, in different sectors, but especially for the private sector, who sometimes is involved in illegal activities because the environment, in a way, forced them to do it. I come from a small state where high levels of corruption, and I think that the international community could help. We are in a globalized era where the international commerce is important. And I think this could be a very key moment to promote that the free trade agreements include a chapter for the rule of law. We all know that corruption is one of the biggest threats to the rule of law. And if we don't focus on how to enhance the rule of law, it's going to be very difficult to fight corruption, especially in environments where the institutions are not strong. I'm talking about the judicial institutions and institutions that will prevent corruption. So the only way that we can fight against the threat, it's about promoting a stronger measures to force the private sector or different sectors to comply with what they have to do if they want to compete in the international arena doing businesses. So Central America has a trade agreement with the United States and also with Europe. And I think that those agreements, and include in the agreements better rulings to promote more transparency and things like the independence of the judiciary, for example, that is very important. If we don't have stronger judicial institutions, it's going to be very difficult to fight corruption. I think that the independence of the judiciary is something that is key to address these topics. And this is when also we have to consider the creation of a new international court, international anti-corruption court. We have different international courts that have been able, to address important topics like human rights, for example. But I think this is a special moment when we have to consider the creation of a new court that could help countries or areas where you can, where you need independent judges to control organized crime that is influencing the institutions.
Okay, well, thank you, Judge Escobar, for these very inspiring words. I'm Denis Simoneau. I'm the chair of the ICC Commissions on Corporate Responsibility and Anti-Corruption, and the Senior Vice President for Institutional Relations for L'Oréal. It's really a great pleasure to address this UN high-level political forum side sessions at its closure, and to seek to tie together some different perspectives on what is needed to advance the global anti-corruption agenda, which is a very, very critical agenda. I'm glad that you mentioned the role of institutions, but I'm very, I would like to insist also on the role of the companies. My company, for instance, L'Oréal, is very committed to the implementation of each of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And we've heard today during the discussion that ICC was a pioneer for the fight against corruption and continues to lead in the business fight for integrity, both through its trailblazing capacity building tools and through its determined advocacy. At ICC, our engagement has long been rooted in the conviction that the fight against corruption action is essential, because this is the only way for there to be a level playing field between all actors, public and private, small and big, regardless the sector and regardless the country. It is the right thing to do morally, and it is the only way to go forward from an economic point of view. ICC took the lead in coming out very early last year with its guidance on integrity for a resilience response and rebuild after COVID-19. Quite clearly, a resilient post-pandemic economy can only be guided by good governance and enhanced public-private cooperation. We've heard today that while the UNGAS political declaration made some modest strides, a lot of work remains to be done, in particular for tougher enforcement of UNCAC, stronger enforcement of public integrity, and better cross-border coordination and investigations. We heard also how addressing corruption needs urgent action, not just for the generations of today, but for the generations to come. We've heard how technology can be leveraged for solutions. And we know that with the development of new technologies, we have more capacities to deal with that. We've heard how business needs positive recognition from government for their compliance program and hard work on integrity. As we've heard earlier, ICC represents millions of companies across the world, and our approach to anti-corruption is very concrete, focusing on practical ways forward to achieve real, ambitious, incremental progress. Public-private cooperation is the only way to make real progress in this sphere, including through responsible business conduct in the procurement, government recognition of business compliance, beneficial ownership transparency, and whistleblower protection. The role of institution, as you insisted, Judge Escobar, is very important. I would like to close by saluting this tremendous energy and momentum that we see is underway for a stronger global anti-corruption agenda. As we've heard from ICC First Vice Chair Maria Fernanda Garcia in the opening, only by challenging the status quo and pursuing stronger accountability mechanism can we really move the needle in making integrity everyone business. I would like to thank Integrity Initiatives International for co-organizing this panel with us. I want to thank ICC First Vice Chair Maria Fernanda Garcia and each of our panelists today for their commitment and truly inspiring inputs. Thank you to all our session participants who have made this a very lively event through your engagement with your comments and questions included on the chat. This ICC official site session of the UN level political forum is now closed. I thank you for your participation. Thanks a lot.